I've got 3 more awesome comics to show you from my Discord community. Stick around to the end of this video to find out how your comic can be featured in one of these videos. With that said, let's get to the first of 3. So the first comic is by Captain CAPSLOCK and it's called The Red Sand Blues, and we're going to tackle things like story clarity and panel composition and visual storytelling and a little bit of workflow efficiency at the end. So the first thing I want to cover is story clarity. Now, when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy, or any comic that is not on Earth or in our world, they can be a lot harder to get off the ground than other comics because you need to have a certain level of buy-in from your audience. Unlike a comic that is sort of set in the current day or set in areas that we have a lot of references to, where you don't really need to explain anything, when it comes to being on a different planet or in a different society or a different world, you have to kind of explain what is and isn't important to your audience. Especially for fantasy comics, like on Webtoon and stuff, you'll see like a huge exposition dump before the comic starts. Like, that's a really common trope. Personally, I hate it. And you kind of do the same thing, or a very similar thing. And I'll come on to that as like the main meat of this critique. But first I want to talk about panel compositions, because you do some interesting things with your panel compositions in the first chapter, but then you sort of leave it. And let me show you exactly what I mean here. So as we can see, this is one panel that goes straight across the screen, and we've got some gutters that are sort of coming in and out of the, like in front of and behind the artwork, which is a really interesting effect. Now, I think that this is safe in some ways because it's only one panel. I think if you have panels either side, it would confuse things a lot more because the audience wouldn't necessarily know where one panel finishes and another one starts. But this is one panel, so you get away with it. What you don't get away with though, and which is really confusing, is this section of the panel here. This is really, really confusing. So we see this line here, which is her jawline. That looks like this guy's finger. And genuinely, it took me a while to realize that his finger wasn't going through her face and coming out the other side, because that's exactly what it looks like. And there's one thing that you could do which might help this, which is if you either drop the jawline slightly so it doesn't look like the continuation of this finger, or if you change the color of this jawline, or maybe don't have a line for it instead at all, instead have just a bit of a value to indicate the jawline rather than to describe it exactly with a line, that might help. But the main thing that will help is just to not do this at all because I don't understand why this is here other than the desire to be clever with the panels. And I get that impulse. I think a lot of comic creators like to be clever with the way that they set out the pages and set out the panels. And I think if you were to get rid of this bit and just have his hand just holding her jaw and kept everything else the same, I think it would be fine. And it wouldn't be confusing at all. And it's just an interesting stylistic choice. Now, if you didn't have this at all, would it make the panel worse? No. Would it make it better? Maybe. But I think having it there, if you've decided because that looks cool or you're influenced by something that I'm not aware of, that's all good. Keep it. Just don't keep that because it's actively making the panel read differently. So it's interfering with the panel and not in a good way. And we've got another example of this here. So again, like the panel, the gutters sort of diagonally going across and coming in and out. Again, it's a cool visual. It looks interesting. But again, this area is just confusing. I don't understand. Again, it looks like his hand is going into her back and then coming out the other side. And again, like his hand has been cut off, but her shoulder hasn't been cut off. And it's again, visually confusing. And especially because this is so close to the start of the comic, you really don't want to be putting off people or confusing them that early on, because in this phase of the comic, your readers are still in the process of trusting that they're in good hands, that you're going to take care of their entertainment needs by giving them an interesting story. And if you have visual stuff like this, that can sort of break that immersion and cause a lot of confusion. That's the only thing that I would say strongly consider getting rid of, because I think it's actively hurting the panels. And I think, if memory serves, they're the only panels that you did that effect in. Everything else is relatively normal. So again, it makes me sort of question, was that just an experiment? Was that just because you felt like it? I'm not sure. I don't understand why those panels were there for that reason. That's that. Because everything else in the comic, I think one of your big strengths, and I'm going to come to my favorite panel very shortly. So I'm spoiling the entire thing. This, I love that panel. That is my favorite panel in this entire comic. And the reason why is I love the body language. I love this character in particular. I love the body language. It's so effective and so impactful. And yeah, I think this is just even though it's simple, and this is kind of my point, to me, that's so much more effective and impactful than having the vertical lines going through the comic, through the panel. Because yeah, you might say, oh, but it's clever or it's stylistic or whatever, and that's fine. That to me, even though it's a simple like front shot, that is way better, way more impactful. And I just really like that shot. And your visual storytelling is really good. Like the panel compositions are really good. The visual storytelling is really good. So like that's a great shot as well. And this panel is great as well. You've got a great sense of scale, like this huge dome. And I really hope you use some software to help you with those grid lines. If you did that by hand, that hurts my head because that must have taken fucking ages. So yes, as far as panel compositions and as far as drawings and all of that, I think you are extremely well skilled in those things. I don't think you really got an issue with those at all, to be honest. I think you're a really, really good comic creator. And again, like you capture expressions really well and character really well, and it's interesting. Like I really enjoyed reading this comic. But for the meat of this critique, I want to go back to the start. You know, at the start of this, I said that with things like sci-fi, and any comic really, but especially things like sci-fi or things that are like off-world, you need to have a certain amount of buy-in from your audience. And one of the things that a lot of comic creators should do, but don't often do, is get there as quickly as possible. So a friend of mine who's a really good comic creator, he always says whenever he's thinking about the start of his comic, he always starts with a bang. Like you've got to start with a bang, because you've got to give people a reason to want to turn the pages, because that's the job of the introduction, right? Is to get people to get into it and build that momentum so they get into the story and the characters and so on and so forth. Now, starting with a bang, you don't need to take that literally. It doesn't need to literally be a bang, but it needs to be something to hook people in and give them a reason to care, give them a reason to turn the page. I would argue that you don't do that with this comic, because we start with the prologue with this scene here, which is an interview scene with this character who is Dorothea and an unknown person off panel. And this scene is her talking about the Mars project and basically talking about the different marketing campaigns that they did to try and convince people to go onto the Mars project. And this goes on for the 8 pages in total before we get to the first chapter, as you can see here. And we have the interview and we have the various different posters that she talks about. The problem here is that I'm not a good representation of your audience. And it's not because I'm not interested, because I am interested. It's because I was given a reason to read this before I read it. You know, I'm reading this primarily because you've asked me to. Now, I would read this anyway because, like I say, I think it's a good comic and I'm a fan. But I'm trying to think of this as somebody who's coming in cold, who's never heard of you, never heard of the comic, and is just picking up for the first time. So with that hat on, I'm saying that this prologue is not giving me a good enough reason to want to continue reading until you get to this page. And the reason why is because of this bit of dialogue. The thing they weren't telling us is that when you go to Mars, you don't come back. That is tension. That is stakes. That is something for me to sink my teeth into and for me to realize that, oh damn, like something bad's going to happen to whoever you introduce us to, which will be the previous panels that I showed you with them on Mars. Like now I know as the audience member that those guys are doomed. They're never going back, or at least they're the stakes. That's the tension, right? So now suddenly I care about them more because I care about the stakes that are involved. Does that make sense? But it takes you till page 8 to get there. So I'm not saying you necessarily need to do that on page 1, but certainly by page 2 or 3, I think there needs to be more of a reason for me to care about this. And I would also consider, first of all, before I continue, I don't think you need to rewrite or redraw any of this. But, and to be honest, I've just had this idea now. It might be an idea to put the prologue slightly further deeper into the comic, because it doesn't necessarily matter that you don't necessarily need to know this first before you start the comic. Because if you start off, let's look at chapter 1, the first page of chapter 1. If you start off with that, that's a lot more intriguing than an interview scene. So that's already starting with action. So this, to me, would be the start of the comic. You can even spread out the interview segment. So each, sorry, let's go back to it to show, don't tell. So each poster that she talks to, you can plot those in almost as like chapter breaks, where you've got this interview that's sort of, you're going back and forth between the interview and what's going on now. Like this obviously happened, I assume, after the events of the comic, or maybe before. I'm not entirely sure. But you can sprinkle these in and as little moments in between the chapters and the scenes. I think that would be quite effective and quite interesting. But that's just an idea. Now, the reason why I'm sort of going on about this so much is because I genuinely really did like this comic. I got into it. I think it's a really good comic. I think you're a really good comic creator. I just worry that those 8 pages aren't going to be enough to hook people in who are cold to your comic. And so therefore they're not going to enjoy the rest of it. Whereas if you start off with a bit more action and intrigue, then they're much more likely to actually read it and come back to it and keep coming back to it over time, which is obviously the goal, right? Whereas if you just rearrange that scene, so chapter 1 is the start of the comic. I know that that's the prologue, but it doesn't matter because that's the first page that people are going to read is the prologue. So take the prologue and put it somewhere else in the comic would be the thing that I would do. And take chapter 1 and put that at the very start. Like this is the sort of comic that, I mean, I'd love to see you in the group cohort or the one-to-ones on my Patreon, because this is the kind of stuff that I can really sink my teeth into. But I hope this critique video was helpful in the interim. Now, before I move on to the next comic, I'm going to talk about workflow efficiency, because again, you mentioned it in the form. Now, I don't know much about your current workflow setup. I don't know how many hours you have available or what else is going on in your life that could be a challenge or an obstacle for you progressing with your comic. But what I can say is that without knowing that, the best thing for you to do for your workflow efficiency is to take advantage of the Discord community. And so when you're doing your next thumbnails, get it to a point where other people can understand what's going on, and then show the community and ask them, does this make sense? Is the pacing good? Is it clear? And then see what they say. Now, you don't have to take their feedback and change everything. If you disagree, just keep it as it is. But sometimes it can be really helpful to get a second pair of eyes on our work, because sometimes we can get too close to it and we can kind of lose our perspective. So getting a second pair of eyes onto your work in the thumbnail stage, so it's quicker to make changes, is the main thing that I would recommend in terms of improving your workflow efficiency. And speaking of second pair of eyes, for everybody else watching this, click the link in the video description and give this a read and add it to your collection, because it's well worth it. So thank you very much, Captain CAPSLOCK. And I really love your name. I feel like I should be shouting it, but my wife is asleep upstairs and I don't want to die. So next comic. Now, I can't show you this comic online because it isn't online. And I can't tell you what the name of the comic is either, because I don't think you put the name of the comic in the form. But this is by Cloudy. And the things that they were concerned about were self-confidence in their art skill, face and bust syndrome, which if you don't know what that is, I will explain, don't worry, and visualizing sort of in 3D or visualizing the shots, I think is what they're getting at, and what is too much information versus not enough information. Now, the first thing that I'm going to point out is the thing that you can all see at the same time as me, which is this person is very good at drawing. Like, although this shot, which I opened on this shot for a reason to show that they are quite clearly very good at drawing. I know that that shot is easy because it's a side shot and it's a face, and faces are generally speaking easier compared to the more complex shots that you can do in comics. But even still, the storytelling in that face is fantastic. The art skill to draw that is fantastic. You can see the movement, you can see the rain hammering down on her helmet, you can see the intensity in her eyes. This is a great drawing, and you are very, very good at drawing. And here's another example. Look at that. That is a cool shot. Anybody who's not good at drawing, they wouldn't be able to do this. So you can draw. So before I get into this properly, stop telling yourself and stop telling other people that you don't draw very well. I know that's how you feel, and I'm not saying you should ignore your feelings, but you telling yourself or telling other people that is not helping you, and it's not true. So try not to let those thoughts manifest too much, because again, they don't help. Now let's get into the pacing. So broad strokes with the pacing, I think the pacing's good. Actually, I think this scene plays out really nicely. I don't have a problem with it at all. One of the things that I really liked actually was this. I think that's a really nice touch. I really like that. It's sort of like Metal Gear vibes. I think that's really cool. And I think your shots are really cool as well. I think this shot in particular is really cool. So we've got the bike who's dodging a tire coming, and then you got the skid mark of the bike, which sort of transitions into the crack of lightning. But again, that's really cool. And it's a really interesting way to transition from one section of the scene to the other in a way that is quick and interesting and keeps the high octane pace going, which is exactly what you should go for given what this scene is depicting. So to give everybody else a little bit of context, we've got a hurricane, right? And we've got explosions on the highway, and we've got a helicopter overhead, and we've got this motorbike who is this character here. And they're zooming towards something. That's all I know as well. But it's high octane, it's really quick, it's really intense, and I think the pacing and the shots and all of that, I think, are serving that really well. So fantastic on the pacing. And when it comes to the panel compositions as well, like as we've already seen with this, I think your use of the vertical scroll is really impressive as well. And I think you're underestimating your skills quite a lot, not just from drawing, but from composition as well. And that is classic self-doubt. Like, that's self-doubt talking right now. And so try to quieten those voices and just trust that you are a lot better than you think you are. Now, let's talk about panel composition. I think the biggest challenge when it comes to the vertical scroll, which is what you'll see on things like Webtoon and Tapas, and is that a lot of these comics don't show enough of the environments, and they are very, very, very biased towards characters. I think that's partly a stylistic choice, because that's kind of just what people do, is they focus in on the characters and the backgrounds are either blank or they're just sort of a blurred background or whatever. And part of that reason is because you're very limited in terms of the horizontal space that you have, because they are designed for mobile viewing. So you just don't have as much real estate as a traditional comic does. Personally, I don't like the vertical scroll as a creator, and it's primarily for that reason, because you are locked into that aspect ratio, and they're not quite as versatile, in my opinion, as the traditional comic layout. Yes, you can do interesting things with the vertical that you can't necessarily do with the traditional, like doing panel transitions like that, which again is really interesting. You can't get that exact same effect with traditional. And I'm not saying to you, don't do this, don't do vertical, you should do traditional, because if that's what you want to do, then that's what you should do. I'm just trying to sort of set my stall out here and explain that although it's challenging to put the environments in, I think it's entirely possible. And the reason I'm talking about that is because, one, I'm kind of obsessed with environments, but also because you talked about having face and bust syndrome. The biggest thing I can say to you, Cloudy, is that all of the things that you worry about when it comes to your own work are not reflective of reality. I know that that's how you feel, and those feelings are real, but they don't measure up to your work. Like, the way you see your work and the way I see your work, we are on completely different planets. You are very good at drawing, and your compositions are good as well. That, if you remember nothing else, just remember that. But we can go into a few more specifics here. Like, an example is that you don't actually have that many face and bust shots in your comic. You've got like one there. You could argue that's one there, but maybe not. That isn't one. Maybe that's one. That isn't one. That isn't one. That isn't one. That isn't one. That is one. Do you see what I mean? Like, there's really not that many. And you zoom out and you show the environments a lot more than you think you do. So I found it interesting that you felt that way about having face and bust syndrome. Like, this is another example where we're zooming out and we're showing where the character is. Like, they're clearly on an elevated highway with cars around them. If that's all we need to know, then that panel is doing its job, you know? Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that there isn't stuff that we can do. We could take this shot here, let me get to it, boop, 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 and we can go even further back. So one of the things that a lot of people do when they're composing their panels is that they are biased towards the characters. So they think, okay, how am I going to get the character in this shot? And I need people to see their face and I need to see what they're doing. So in your case, it'll be like, I need to show the character's expression, or at least show the details of the helmet, and I need to show the details of the bike. And I think that's another reason why we do face and bust shots so often and not so much the wider shots, because you get to a certain point and you think, how much do I need to show? And am I going to lose the details that matter? And the details that matter in most people's eyes are the characters. But here's an example for how you could take this shot, for example, right here, and take it even further back. So I did a little drawing. I'm going to plop it in here. Bloop. There we go. So one of the things actually, if anybody's got Clip Studio Paint, is you can change the view. So you notice that my view, oh, let me zoom out, looks like this, and I've got this sort of square. This shows you roughly how much space you'll have on the phone. So that's what's in that square is how much detail is going to be on the phone. So I made sure that the panel that I did would fit in to the aspect ratio. And look how much information you can show. So we've got the clouds, we've got the crack of lightning, we've got the buildings in the background, so we know that we're in a city, and we've got the highway, the interconnected highways that sort of lap over each other, and we've got room for a web balloon, and we've got room for another effect happening and cars exploding. So you can really zoom out and your audience is not going to get lost. And the reason they're not going to get lost is because you've already established all of these elements in different areas of your comic. So for example, if we look where we saw this, the clouds and the storm here. So we already know that we're in the same place. If I drew that and it was suddenly sunny, that would be confusing. But we've got that consistency, so people will know we're in the same place. Another example, we know that we're in a city because you established that there. So we're just reinforcing that by putting the city skyline there. And likewise, we established that we're on the highway because of these shots here. So because of that, you can zoom out and you can just draw little dots and stuff to indicate that these are cars. And we know that these are cars because it's on a highway, so we can put 2 and 2 together. We know they're cars as well because we saw the cars exploding before. We're seeing them explode here. We can put 2 and 2 together. And we know that this is the motorbike, not only because of the web balloon that I added in here. You don't necessarily need that, but because of the smoke and the fire that's coming from the back of it, that's propelling the bike forward. Because again, you established that here. Now, I'm pretty sure that is the motorbike, you know, zooming past all the cars. So that's a bit of an assumption on my part, but I'm fairly sure that is the case. So as long as you've got references to what you've already established within the comic, your audience isn't going to be lost, which means you can pull back and you can show these big shots. Now, as far as how often you put these shots in, the honest answer is it kind of depends, which I know is not particularly helpful. So you do kind of have to lean on your own preferences and what you want to do. But if you want to have like a little bit of guidance, there are 2 questions that you can ask, and I wrote them down so I would remember them. 1, does the audience need to know where we are, and has that been established yet? So in this comic, I know where we are in the sense that I know that we're in a city and that she's on the highway or motorway. But the question that I would ask is it important for us to know where she's going? Because I don't know where she's going. Is that important? That's another thing that you can consider showing us as like a shot variation, and also to sort of foreshadow what's coming up in the story. So that's a really effective thing to do. And the second question to ask, although it's technically the third, are you using or overusing the same shots, and do you need some variety? And again, that's where you can add in those variety shots where you think, okay, I'm not showing where she is, I'm showing what she's aiming towards, what she's going towards. Again, that can be a nice way to vary the shots. Another thing is, which kind of links to the previous one that we looked at, is a lot of webtoon comics, it feels to me, and this is a little bit of a critique on webtoons in general, I think, is a lot of comics seem to be competing for who has the most beautiful characters and the most beautiful shots and the most dynamic shots with all the different nice effects and stuff like that. And that's kind of the thing that they focus on quite a lot, at least in my opinion. To me, I'm not that interested in that. That kind of wears thin quite quickly. I would much rather see a shot like this where you can see the world and see everything that's going on, rather than showing like another really dynamic and interesting perspective of a character. So try not to be too clever, I guess, is the advice. A dynamic shot here and there is great because they do look amazing. They do look fantastic. And like the art in most webtoons is really fantastic and really good. But I think a comparatively simple shot, whether it's an overhead shot like this, or even actually, if we go back to like this shot here, this panel here, obviously this is subjective, but I love that shot. I love that panel. It's a front shot. There's nothing like dynamic about it necessarily. Like they could have put the camera down at the stairs and looking up at them. Would that have been interesting? Yeah, but do you need it? No, because I think that works perfectly well and fantastically well. So yeah, don't overthink this too much and give yourself a break, because you are so much better than you think you are. And the last thing I suppose is to think about, when you're thinking about your shots, think about your environment as a character. Like your audience needs to see the environment as much as they need to see the characters. So if you feel that, oh, I'm doing too many face and bust shots, show us the environment, like zoom out, show us an overhead, show us something from far away, just to give us a bit more context about what's going on and where the characters are. But yeah, man, like you are so much better than you think you are. Try not to let self-doubt weigh too heavily on you. It's easier said than done. But if you need like community, then engage with the Discord 100%, because they will help you realize that you are better than you think you are. So thank you very much, Cloudy. There's no link to this comic because it's not online yet, but hopefully it will be soon. So let's go to the third and final comic. Now this comic is a prologue. It's also a vertical scroll. It's on Webtoon, and it's called Astralis, or Astralis. Astralis. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but it's by M. So the main thing that they're concerned about is whether the opening to this comic is effectively engaging, particularly in terms of clarity, pacing, and how much information is revealed versus withheld. So I think that you do a lot of things exceptionally well, and this is one of those comics, you know, in the first comic, Captain CAPSLOCK, I said that sometimes comics just need these tiny little tweaks to get to the next level. You're really going to see that in this one, because like this comic is basically already great. I think there are just one or two little things that I would change to take it to that next level. So the main thing that I'm going to focus on in this part of the critique are panel transitions. So that will include adding it in panels, but also combining panels together to make the pacing and the storytelling just a little bit more concise. So the very first panel that I want to talk about is this panel here. So to give this a little bit of context, and there are going to be spoilers for this, but this character here, she goes to a cave and finds this altar to give them this object, right? So that's the context. Now, we go from this panel here where we got the altar. We know that she's in front of the altar. And then we've got this character that looks like they form into the rocks. And the only reason is because we've got this sort of texture here. I don't think that's the sky. I think that's these rocks here. But there's no connective tissue between this panel and this panel. Like, you can make the assumption that he is probably here. And so, in fact, let's grab this. So we've got this panel goes into this panel, right? Now, I would suggest that if you take this panel here and just duplicate it down and then have that there, I think that would read a lot more. Or what you could do is duplicate the panel and then just crop in a little bit more. So you could sort of, I don't know, crop it about there. So you delete like this area and you sort of zoom in a little bit more. Or you could add an in-between panel. So let me grab all of these like that. Duplicate this down to here, where in this panel, maybe, I don't know, like from the candle or whatever, there's sort of like smoke that appears and then it formulates into this character here. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So there's little things, tiny little tweaks that you can make that can connect those two panels together. So that's example number one. And then example number 2, again, because I think the majority of this plays out really well. It's, again, another example of a really good comic. But we go from the cave and then we go into this forest, okay? Yeah, so she goes deep into the forest, okay, as the dialogue tells us. Now, I think, again, that's a great shot. I think, again, one of the things that you can do from a storytelling perspective is, I think there's a way to make this panel have a bit more impact. And the way to do it is to zoom out. Who would have thought I would have suggested that? But I seem to always suggest that. But the reason why is because like this shot, in terms of how close the camera is to the character and to the rest of them, it's kind of similar to this, and it's kind of similar to that. There's not much variation here, and we're not getting, or at least I'm not getting the sense of how big this forest is. Because I feel that if I had a sense of how big the forest was, I'd have a sense of how deep she's going into the forest, and it kind of marries up with the dialogue that you've written a bit more. So let's switch over to the Wacom again. Oops. So you've got this panel here. Now, if I choose the same size panel, you'll see what I mean. So instead of her sort of taking up this much space, imagine if we drew her where she's taking like that much space. We could go even smaller than that actually if we wanted. And then we put some trees in the foreground. We just like color all of those in with one shade. And then some in the background as well. Maybe some in the midground, I don't know. Something like that. Do you see the difference? So you see how she looks like alone, and she's surrounded, and she's scared, and she's desperate. And you can still, I think you can still show that body language where she's sort of hugging herself and stuff. You don't necessarily always need to see the expression on the face, but you can definitely see the body language even if you're that far away. So that's another sort of thing that I would consider doing. And also it helps not just to enhance the story, but it helps with shot variation as well. Because like I say, a lot of the shots, let's go back to your comic. A lot of the shots are quite similar just in terms of the distance of the camera. Now, as she's walking through, she sees something going on. In fact, I don't want to spoil that, so I'm going to skip over this part because that's not what I want to focus on. This. So she is now running away from a soldier. I'm not going to tell you how or why. You're going to have to read the comic to find that out. But she's running. It's all good. You've got the soldier here telling her to stop. She sees it. There's a big gap here, big drop. She doesn't stop herself in time. She falls. She goes down. That's the end of part 1. All good. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything else, but now we get to a point where she stabs this soldier in the foot and then runs away. This is what I want to focus on. So the first thing to note is this, I'm not entirely sure what she's doing here. I don't know if she's running or if she's backing away with the knife. That panel is quite ambiguous. I'm not entirely sure what's happening there. You could argue that maybe she is running because her cloak thing is trailing behind her, but it doesn't look like she's running to me. So that's something just to keep an eye on and just to sort of keep it in the front of your mind, is the body language clear? I would suggest the body language isn't necessarily clear there. But then we see that she is running. Now, I don't want to spoil how we got to this point, but she is stabbing this soldier in the foot and she's going to run away, okay? So I think she's preparing to run away there, but she's absolutely running away here. Now, did you notice that? So let's play this out. Stabs the soldier in the foot, either is running or is getting ready to run, is definitely running, and now she's collapsed behind a tree. And then she passes out. Where's the soldier? Did he just stand there? And is he now nursing to his foot wound? I don't know. Did he chase her? I don't know. That really confused me. And it's one of those things where you need to add in 1 or 2 panels just to sort of close that loop, because you've got an open loop here where you've got the soldier here who is, he's bad news. He's got a scar. He looks pretty cool, actually. He gets stabbed in the foot and then she runs away. For how long? I don't know. There's only 1 panel of her running and then she's behind a tree. So it doesn't look like she ran for very long, which again suggests like, what's the soldier doing? Especially since she then passes out for a while and then, I don't want to spoil it, but she passes out. So again, where did the soldier go? There's no closure for that. So what I would suggest, one of the things that you could do is, again, show a shot of the soldier chasing after her. Because even if he's got a stabby foot, he's going to chase after her because he's got a scar. He seems pretty badass anyway. Because he's saying, come back here in this panel. So what I would do is maybe consider taking this panel, or at least taking the dialogue in this panel. So taking this bit here. Let me use a better color. So taking this bit here and putting it there. And then again, we can see that she's running away and he's chasing her. And we've got a really good reason as to why she would be able to outrun him, because he's got a hurt foot. So you've already done the legwork. But then, once you've established this, we can then put in another running shot, which is similar, to be fair, to the shot that you had in part 1 of her running away from the soldiers. But again, like, that's quite an effective shot because we can see that she's running away. Maybe we can put him even further in the distance to show that she's not just running away, but she's getting away. And we also get to see the emotions on her face, which I think is one of your strongest suits, is showing the emotion on faces. So you definitely want to lean into that. But the other reason that I added that shot in as well, because you could argue that you don't need it, because you've already established that she's running away. Do you really need to establish that again? The only reason why is because sometimes you put multiple panels in to show that something's happening for a while. Because like in the original, when she's running away, we've only got one shot showing that she's running before she then gets to the tree. And again, we've got no soldier in sight. It looks like she's just running for a relatively short period of time and then suddenly she's there. Whereas if you add in an extra panel of her running, at least it gives that impression that she's been running for a little bit longer. I hope that makes sense. But then we need to close the loop. So we can do that by, again, relatively simple panels these are. You don't need to get clever with it. We can just show her she's behind a tree, maybe she's panicking, and he's running past. So again, we get that closure that she has outrun him and it has hidden from him and he's carrying on. And that's his part in this scene is now done because he can go off looking for her forever. And that's where she can then drop to the floor saying, my head, and then she passes out and the rest of the prologue plays as it does. So it's about finding that connective tissue in between the panels. Sometimes it's just about adding one or two little bits of information or to close a loop or to give closure to something that you've already set up. And sometimes it can be really easy to forget about those things or just not think about them. So again, like with everyone else, absolutely use a Discord community, especially when you're in the thumbnails. Like if I were creating this comic, I would show people these thumbnails because I think, broadly speaking, you can tell what's going on, broadly speaking, in the thumbnails that I've done, even though they are just literally like sticker figures. I don't know. Wow, what is that? There you go. And again, like that took like 3 seconds to do. So they don't have to be super detailed, but they do have to be obvious as to what's going on. And if you show people those things and ask them if they can follow what's going on, then that's much easier to deal with than having to go through the pencil ink coloring stages and then show people and then be like, oh, I wish I had actually done this, this, and this. And then you might have to redraw them or you might have to add additional work that you could have avoided if you just shown people when they were at the thumbnail stage. So yeah, take advantage of the community because honestly, I know that people don't like necessarily doing that because they feel embarrassed or they don't want to be a burden or they feel that people won't care or people will judge them or laugh at them or whatever. I can't speak for other communities. I can speak for mine and that won't happen in mine because if it does, the people who do that won't last very long in the community. It basically just don't be a dick. And so, yeah, take advantage of the community and show people your stuff. That's my big takeaway for this entire video. Show people your stuff. But I really like this comic. Sorry, I got distracted then for a second. I really like this comic. I got hooked. There's a reason I don't want to spoil this because I really want people to read it. And I'm looking forward to the story beyond the prologue and where it's going and the world that you're starting to reveal to us. I think, again, the pacing's really good. So other than those little connective tissues, I think the overall pacing's really good. So yeah, they were 3 comics from my community. I think, like, thank you to all 3 of you for giving me your comics and trusting me with your comics. I hope it helped. If you want to have your comic featured, then you can join the Discord, because that's when I usually prompt people to submit their comics using the Google form that I've got. You can see the link to that in my channel page. Join the Discord, it's free, why not? And if you want more focused critiques, whether that's in a one-to-one setting, because I do one-to-ones, or in a group setting, because I've recently updated my Patreon. So there's going to be a link to that as well in the description, as well as the 2 out of these 3 comics that you should absolutely add to your collection. Thank you very much again for people watching and for people giving me your comics, and I'll see you later.